There is a podcast that lies between the imagination of two simple-minded earthlings. Travel with these two longtime friends, Jimbo and 80s E, as they attempt to explore the fifth dimension. Follow along with them as they take the key and unlock the door to the vast space between shadow and substance. This podcast is one of trivia, of insight, and of sounds and ideas from one of the greatest television shows ever produced. You are embarking on a timeless journey. There is your signpost up ahead. You are entering the tragedy of cinema's Twilight Zone.
The hand belongs to Mr. Don S. Carter, male member of a honeymoon team en route across the Ohio countryside to New York City. In one moment, they will be subjected to a gift most humans never receive in a lifetime. For 1 penny, they'll be able to look into the future. The time is now. The place is a little diner in Ridgeview, Ohio. And what this young couple doesn't realize is that this town happens to lie on the outskirts of the Twilight Zone.
All right, guys, welcome back to the Tragedy of Cinema's podcast, the Twilight Zone series. I'm your host, Jimbo, and joined once again by my co-host,
80s E, back in the fifth dimension, which is the place to be.
Yep, back again. Man, if you guys knew the struggle that we had trying to get some of these recorded, it's amazing that by the time we get done recording these, that it's even coherent.
Yeah, definitely.
And, you know, with it being close to the holidays, it's just time gets less and less to get together. And part of that was my fault. Part of that was my fault this time because I did have a hole in my tooth and a root canal, and I'm still waiting to get my crown on there. So at least I'm giving the old college try today.
That's right. We're back just in the nick of time.
Ba-doom, boom. Oh, he's got his own sound clips these days. So this is going to be really interesting. So, you know, this is an episode that Eric and I have pretty much discussed a while now. We got different viewpoints. He likes this episode. I'm not a real big fan of it, but we'll get there. So, Eric, let's go ahead and take away this episode of Season 2, Episode 7, The Nick of Time.
All right. Okie doke. This is the Nick of Time episode, The Twilight Zone Season number 2. This is episode number 7, and it was directed by Richard L. Baer. And it was written by Richard Matheson. We have featured music, which is unfortunately uncredited in this episode. The original air date for this episode was November the 18th, 1960. Our total production cost was $43,263.05. And when we adjust that for inflation, it's $433,811.46, which is about a 902% increase over these many, many years. And that's all I have as far as production costs. Jimbo, I think you got a little more specific production costs itemized section here if you want to go ahead and jump into that along with the cast.
Absolutely. So a little bit more detailed into the production value of this. Like Eric said, the shooting script dated was August 12th for 1960. The producer and the secretary had a total of $1,935. And now you see under this, there's one that says the story and secretary. So there's two different secretaries here. I don't know if it's the same secretary, but that had a cost of $2,155. The director got $1,250 for this episode. The cast got a total of $4,950 and yes, 3 cents. So I don't know who negotiated the 3 cents into the deal, but that's that. I don't have a breakdown of what cast members got paid what. It's just the total cast. The unit manager and secretary was $600. So then again, there's another secretary. There's a production fee of $825. Agents and commission made $2,500. Legal and accounting made $250. And here's one. Below the line charges for MGM, $28,043.86. And below the line charges other, which was $754.16. And yes, the total production cost was $43,263.05. So there you have a little bit of how much it took to produce an episode of The Twilight Zone. As you'll notice in some of the episodes going forward, some of them cost more, some of them cost less, and it was just their way of trying to reduce the cost, as we'll see in our next episode, of the different television cameras used to film those episodes. So let's go ahead and move on to the cast. This person needs really no introduction. He's legendary in his own status.
Yep.
William Shatner plays Don Carter. You probably know him most for his legendary role as Captain Kirk from the original Star Trek, the original series, also several spin-off movies. And he was also like one of the first actors to go to space here recently, last year, at 90 years old or close to it, or a little older, I think.
I think he was, 92 or 93 maybe.
So then you also have playing his wife, Pat Carter. You have Patricia Breslin. She was a mainstay on General Hospital for a couple, I think 23 episodes, I think I read. She was in the movie The People's Choice in 1955. She's been in Alfred Hitchcock's Presents. And she's also in a movie called Homicide in 1961, which I just sent the trailer to Kyle because it's very interesting and we might be covering on the main feed. But she was also in The Twilight Zone Season 4, Episode 10, which we'll get there, No Time Like the Past. Next, we have Guy Wilkerson. He's the counterman. Eric, you may not know this, but he was actually in To Kill a Mockingbird. He was uncredited as the jury foreman in To Kill a Mockingbird. He's been in tons of TV shows. I mean, he's got 211 credits to his name, including Captain Midnight from 1942. Next, you have another familiar person. You should know him, Stafford Rep, who was the mechanic. His probably greatest thing you know him for was Chief O'Hara from Batman in 1966. He just has that voice and look.
I remember him.
Yep. Next, you have Walter Reed, who is just credited as the Man. He was in How to Make a Monster in 1958, but he was also in the Batman TV series as well, where he played an officer for 2 episodes. He also had 211 credits to his television fame, too. Dee Carroll, she played the woman. She was in the TV show Huckleberry Finn in 1975, where she played Aunt Sally. She was also in a bunch of TV episodes, including Emergency in 1972, and she has 122 credits to her name. And this guy, even though you may not recognize him, he is probably one of Twilight Zone fame, and I'm getting ready to tell you why. Robert McCord, he was a dinner Patreon. He's uncredited. This guy was in 32 episodes of The Twilight Zone.
Wow.
He is like a glorified extra. And here you are, just from and he's been in all 5 seasons of The Twilight Zone. These are the ones from for season 1. I'm getting ready to tell you, he was in 8 episodes of season 1. First one was season 1, episode 3, where Mr. Denton on Doomsday. He was the stagecoach driver. Season 1, episode 6, The Escape Clause. He was a man in the subway. Season 1, episode 10, Judgment Night. He was the sailor in the ski cap. Season 1, episode 19, Purple Testament. He was the man walking in the lobby. Season 1, episode 22, Monsters Due on Maple Street. He was the ice cream vendor. Season 1, episode 23, World of Difference. He was a cameraman crew member. And season 1, episode 24, Long Live Walter Jameson, where he played a student. And season 1, episode 28, A Nice Place to Visit, where he was a waiter. So this guy, I mean, as far as I can tell, I think he might have the most credits or uncredited in the Twilight Zone series, besides maybe Rod Serling himself. So I thought that was a very interesting tidbit of information. And then, yes, of course, you had Rod Serling, the host of the Twilight Zone, and the narrator as usual. So, Eric, that is your cast for
all right.
Time.
Boy, a lot of good stuff there. Let's move along with the plot here. Don and Pat Carter are on their honeymoon when their car breaks down in the small town of Ridgeview, Ohio. And store that under your cap because we're going to come back to Ridgeview, Ohio and the significance there. They have a few hours to spare while their car is being repaired and spend time in the diner. There they find a fortune-telling machine, a game where you ask a question, and for a penny, the machine will spit out an innocuous answer. When the machine apparently begins to predict events, Don's promotion at work, a near accident on the street outside, a superstitious Don becomes infatuated with the device, threatening his marriage and his future with Pat. So I want to segue into this Reader's Digest article on readersdigest.com. And the title of it is, 11 Bizarre Origins of Everyday Superstitions. So I think we touch on about 2, maybe 3 of the superstitions in this episode. But let's go with a few of those, and I'll read a little bit about the origins and why we, quote-unquote, have superstitions. The number 13. The fear of the number 13 is perhaps one of the most well-known superstitions. In fact, it's called, I don't even know if I can pronounce this. It's called triskaidekaphobia.
Nailed it.
I don't know. That's a long word. Triskaidekaphobia. It's the phobia's official name, and it's the fear of the number 13. And it hits about 10% of the U.S. population, according to History.com.
Wow.
That sounds really ridiculous. But anyway, it's one of the earliest myths surrounding the unlucky number 13 due to a clerical error, where the 13th law was omitted from the world's largest or oldest legal document, the Code of Hammurabi. Then there's Judas Iscariot, the 13th guest to arrive at the Last Supper. I don't know so much about that one. A similar occurrence took place in the Norse mythology when the mischievous god Loki was the 13th member of a dinner party. And then, of course, we always reference the science about why we always fear, or this is a familiar one, the Friday the 13th. You know, obviously that one's always a fearful date. But here's one from the episode, carrying a rabbit's foot. That's number 2 on this Reader's Digest list here. It says, this belief stems from the ancient beliefs of totemism, or toteism. The spiritual connection between animals and humans. If a tribe believed they descended from rabbits, it wasn't unusual for them to carry around parts of that rabbit's body, particularly the feet. The foot is also a phallic symbol that represented increased fertility and a bountiful harvest and a good fortune. Celtic tribes believed that rabbits could speak with underground gods and spirits thanks to their burrows, and another reason why carrying a rabbit's foot could bring good luck. All right, so that's the rabbit's foot. Let's talk about number 3 on the list was a 4-leaf clover. We're all kind of familiar with the 4-leaf clover. And it says, according to Scientific American, the chances of finding a 4-leaf clover are 1 in 10,000, making the find a lucky thing in and of itself. But the luck of the clover dates back to Adam and Eve, according to HowStuffWorks.com. Legend has it that as Adam and Eve were leaving the Garden of Eden, Eve plucked a 4-leaf clover as a souvenir. Another theory dates back to the ancient Celtic world when it was believed that 4-leaf clovers would help ward off evil spirits. There was also a medieval theory that possessing this lucky plant allowed one to see fairies. So that's that one. You want to hear about wearing black for mourning? Well, I'll go ahead and throw this one in here. While you might not think twice about it, wearing black stems from the superstition. Many ancient cultures actually considered death to be contagious, and it was wise to avoid someone who had recently been around a dead person. In Rome, wearing all black was a way to let everyone know that you had been in the presence of death. So that's one for wearing black.
Is there one about a black cat crossing the street too?
No.
Walking under a ladder?
Stepping on cracks. Knocking on wood. I don't have anything about the ladder or anything, but that's just a couple. I think 2. The clover on the keychain that Don has, and then he also has a rabbit's foot. And actually, later in the episode, you actually see him when he gets up after he's been talking to the Mystic Seer, and I'm kind of getting ahead of myself, but I noticed this. I've seen this episode probably like 5 times, but I went back and watched it again, and he actually kisses the key ring as he gets up from the table. You know, sort of, he was steeped very deep in superstition, speaking of Don. But, well, do we want to go ahead and launch right into the episode here, Jimbo? Do you have anything off the top that
sure. Let me go.
As introduction?
Yeah, let me go and throw this in here. This is the ideal of why or how Richard Matheson came up with the ideal of this episode. So Richard Matheson recalled the genesis for the ideal of the script to author Matthew R. Bradley On Nick of Time, my wife and I were in a coffee shop in the San Fernando Valley, and there was this little fortune-telling machine that answered yes or no. And so I just thought, oh, that's an interesting idea. You know, most of them come, the derivation is something you read. With me, it's mostly something I see in the movies. If it's a lousy movie, I don't leave, which I should, but my mind drifts and something that I see may just trigger an alternative idea. Matheson put a few pennies into the machine, and the prediction gave the impression of coming true. The art department added the devil's head for effect, which was not described in the original script. Matheson was paid $2,000 for the rights to In the Nick of Time. The title would later be shortened for The Twilight Zone. Originally, this was planned to be script number 41. 2 months before this episode went to film in early June, Boris Sagal was originally slated to direct. Sagal was unable to commit due to scheduling conflicts, so on July 27, 1960, Richard L. Baer took over the helm. Sagal did manage to do 2 episodes of the series later on, The Silence and The Arrival. The filming was completed a few hours less than originally planned. So,
all right. So that's sort of the origin story of how Richard Matheson, the genesis, if you will, of the idea. As we open the episode, the first trivia point that I kind of come to for all you car buffs out there, this car in this episode that's being towed behind the tow truck is a Ford Fairlane Skyliner. It's 1957. I'm not sure on the exact date because I had to do a little Google research, but it looks like it's a 1957 convertible, and they are replacing the fuel pump. The fuel pump has gone out, so a fuel pump would cost you today, for that particular car, would cost you around $110. I think I looked it up. It was close to $20 for the year that this episode aired, which would have been like around close to $20 for a fuel pump to replace for that.
Eric, did you ever have a
cool car?
Did you ever have a convertible?
No, but I would like to have one maybe before I pass on out of this world. I've never owned one. They're here in the Midwest. They're not really that practical because we get a lot of weather, unless it's your extra car that you could store in your garage. But that would be awesome. Maybe that I could have one. One day.
I know you were in the mood to car shop the last couple of weeks, so I thought maybe if by watching this, you would go out and just buy you a convertible.
Yeah, I've got the bug pretty bad here. I'm ready to switch cars and get something new. It hits me, they call it a 7-year itch for a reason. About every 7 years, it's like time to trade up the cars. But Ford Fairlane Skyliner for the first trivia point here. Moving on to the second notation that I made. It's a sign that's in the garage. I don't know, it might be interesting to some, it might not be, but it states this: I have not been told is no excuse. Know by observing, thinking, studying, doing. This is the sign on the wall in the garage, which can be seen as the car is towed in. So make of it what you will. Apparently this particular garage had a lot of trouble with employees, maybe making excuses. You could probably apply that to a lot of places of employment. So that's just a little tidbit.
But do you think that sign was for the garage workers or for the customers coming in?
Could have, yeah. I guess it could have been for both. I didn't really consider that. So after Don and Pat drop off the car, and they talk to the mechanic slash tow truck guy, Chief O'Hara. After they talk to him, they decide. Well, they find out it's going to be about 4 hours.
Yeah,
or
3 or 4 hours
for their car to get repaired. So they go. They decide they're going to walk down the sidewalk. I think this is in here. I'm going to throw this in here because there's a line, and I looked it up, and it comes straight out of the script, but I can't figure out what it means. Maybe one of our listeners would know. Pat uses the line June prune honeymoon, and that is totally foreign to me. I don't know what it means. I'm sure it has something to do with honeymooners and marriage, and I'm sure maybe because people are married in June. I don't know, but I looked it up on the internet.
Well, that's when I got married. I got married in June, so
yeah, maybe because they're.
But I'm not going to call my wife. I'm not going to call my wife a prune. I'm just saying.
Yeah, I don't know what that exactly means, but yeah. So moving on to the next expression, as they're walking down the sidewalk, they come to a light pole. They're trying to cross the street. And I think Don uses the expression bread and butter, which again is another superstitious blessing. Okay, get this. Bread and butter is a superstitious blessing or charm typically said by young couples or friends walking together when they are forced to separate by an obstacle, such as a pole or another person. By saying the phrase, the bad luck of letting something come between them is thought to be averted. Both walkers must say the phrase, and if they do not do this, then a bitter quarrel is expected to occur. The concept derives from the difficulty of separating butter from bread once it has been spread. Buttered bread cannot be unbuttered. So that is an interesting little tidbit right here early in the episode. And because I don't think Pat says it back, only Don says bread and butter. So you see this wedge beginning to form, and we'll get back to that later on in the episode. I think we come to the next specific item that I have here. I think we go, after we come off the street, we go into the diner. They find their place at the booth. And then I said Ridgeview, Ohio would come into play here. I think that's in the monologue here by Serling. Serling talks about a small town in Ridgeview, Ohio, which is interesting because he always wrote from a place from, what he knew. So this is a little interesting trivia about Rod. Rod, he not only lived in Ohio for 8 of the 50 years he spent on the planet from 1946 to 1954, he started his writing career there. And after serving as a paratrooper in the South Pacific during World War II, he enrolled at Antioch College in Yellow Springs. It was there he decided to become a writer, and he returned in the 60s to teach at that college. And that's according to Cleveland.com. So it's just a little review there, a little research, and we find little interesting tidbits throughout the episode that relate to Rod personally. So I thought that was kind of cool. Jimbo, do you got anything inside of the episode here as we're in the initial... Actually, we were moving along in act number 1.
Not so far, but I'm trying to remember because it's been a second since I watched this. Is this where, when they first go in there, do they actually sit down at that table? Or is somebody sitting at that table that has the machine on it?
The table is open in the first
one?
act.
Okay, so that must be later on when they come back. Okay.
When they come back, there's some older ladies sitting there. Yeah. So I think that's as far along as we're moving along in the episode. Well, I'll just note this in reference to the wedge being driven. In the beginning act, they both sit on the same side of the booth. I talked about that with Jimbo off air, but Don and Pat sit on the same side of the booth. And as Don sort of becomes more and more gripped by the superstition of the mystic seer, you see that wedge forming. And then in the second act, when they come back to the booth, I only bring it up because you just referenced it earlier, Jimbo, they actually sit on opposite sides of the booth when they come back in the second act. But Pat is, I don't know, in the beginning she's sort of playfully engaged in the mystic seer and the fortune teller, and we have magic 8 balls and all this stuff. They're kind of fun, but when she sees Don's being captivated by this, she becomes a lot more distressed and concerned, and you can really pick up on that a lot. The first thing that sort of, grabs Don's attention is he's up for a promotion, right? They're traveling across the country, and they're trying to get back, I think, to where they live in, I think, New York or New Jersey. And so Don decides he's going to call the office, and he talks to the secretary, and he's sort of inquiring whether he got the promotion or not. And I don't know, Jimbo, if you have it, but I don't have a list of all the actual cards and what the sayings are, like what the actual Mystic Seer sayings are. But that was one of the first ones. And he goes and calls. Sorry,
the thing about this Mystic Seer, if you will, and I use my air quote parentheses, is everything that it's spitting out is like that magic 8 ball you get with a kid, and you shake it up, and it's like, cannot be seen. Yeah. Yes, it's going to happen. Yes, largely so. Yes. No, not at this time. Wait and see. It's a very generic answers
general
that it's giving.
Mm-hmm.
But he is so wrapped up in it that he's making those answers be like it's actually reading his fortune.
Yeah. Richard Matheson, it says here, was so impressed with Patricia Breslin's portrayal of William Shatner's character's wife that he lobbied for her to be given a similar role in Shatner's second and last Twilight Zone outing, the Nightmare at 20,000 Feet in 1963, but thus that did not happen. So that was, obviously, that's a very famous
It's probably
episode,
one of the most famous episodes. It's probably, the one that put William Shatner on the map.
Yeah, so she did a really good job, and I thought she did a really good job in portraying his wife in this particular episode, too. But anyway, going back to the Mystic Seer, and Don is, he's calling his office. He finds out he gets the promotion. He's going to be an office manager, and, he has all these big plans, as most people, young people do, and he's a newlywed, and, things are looking up. So that just sort of cements in his mind, like, well, this thing's got to be for real, because look at all the good fortune that came from, this one phone call. And then, trouble kind of descends in the episode because Don continues to ask it. He tries to ask more specific questions, and he gets more general answers, and he becomes actually gripped by fear that something bad is going to happen by asking the Mystic Seer a couple more questions. And, he's actually afraid to leave the cafe because he's afraid that something bad's going to happen. And, we cut to the street, and they decide they're going to go out for a walk. And again, Pat is just becoming more increasingly frustrated, I guess, with, the whole situation, and just, she can't understand how he's so captivated, and he's trying to explain to her, how could it know these things? And, he's trying to give his, argument. And then they come to the street, and, Don grabs her hand, and they're going to walk across the street, and there's like a truck coming, but what they don't see is a car on the other side of the truck, and Don says, oh, we can make it. And so he grabs her, and they run across the street, and they almost get hit. And again, that's the second thing that cements in his mind, well, the Mystic Seer must be right, because tragedy was just barely averted. And, I had this conversation with this machine, in the coffee shop or the diner or whatever. And so again, he's just more and more convinced that, this thing is predicting his fortune. And there's a throwaway line here as they're walking through town on the sidewalk. I think, Jimbo, you had that particular.
This is one of the
bit of trivia
when you're watching this episode. When this scene comes up, you were kind of taken aback about it because it's a word that's not used or hardly anymore, and if it is, it's more replaced by another word. So I'm going to read it, but I'm not going to use the word that's used. Basically, William Shatner says, basically, stop treating me like I'll use the word mentally challenged child. They use the R word here. So on November 19, 1960, the day after this episode was telecast, Mrs. Robert Cassandra of Hillside, Illinois, wrote a letter to Serling concerned about the content of this episode. Yesterday, as my husband and I watched your show, Nick of Time, with William Shatner and Patricia Breslin, the actor, in answer to the actress, William Shatner said, quote, stop treating me like a R-word child. My husband and I were stunned at this malicious-sounding statement. If you only knew how that statement hurt, couldn't you have used a different term? I have a feeling we are not alone in feeling this way. We have a R-word darling that God sent to us. Serling sent a prompt reply. I did not write the script of Nick of Time, but I know the writer personally and professionally, and I also know that he is a man of stature and goodwill who would never knowingly have caused as much personal hurt to you as he obviously did with a thoughtless, throwaway line which to him meant nothing, but which to you must have been heart-rending. Please accept my apologies in this and my assurance that it will never happen again on my show or any program in which I have a part. Too often we go along blithely unaware of the myriad meanings of language amongst people, where to most a certain line is general, unspecific, and quite innocuous. To others it has a very special meaning and can be both damaging and offensive. I'll be most careful of this in the future, and I thank you so very much for calling it to my attention. This isn't the first time that we've seen that Rod Serling has had to write an apology for the Twilight Zone. And I don't know, but you can tell Rod's a man of I guess, stature, a man of feelings, character, right? But to say that the director of this wouldn't have done it on purpose, maybe he did. But as you know, we talked about this a little off air, that some of the words that we used as children in grade school, even high school, probably were offensive, even though they weren't bad words at the time. You know what I mean? They're more offensive now than they were then. And I think a lot of people have come a long way, me and you included, about not using those terms anymore. But it's just, it takes character like Rod Serling to admit when he was wrong, or his director, even though he didn't know about it, he still took the time to personally address the issue with the lady that he offended, and also basically a blanket apology to everybody that he did. And I think that's a good point.
Yeah, I would speak to that too. It says that he responded to her very promptly, and I think that, again, that speaks to his character. He could have easily ignored the letter, but he considered it an important enough thing to respond and offer his apologies, which this has been multiple times where he's responded to people who might have even had criticisms. And so I just think, again, it speaks to his character that he wanted to try to at least offer an apology, and he tried to explain that was just a throwaway line, and it makes him that much better and greater in my opinion.
Absolutely.
The Twilight Zone was not telecast on the evening of November 25th, 1960. I'll just go ahead and throw this in here, this little bit of trivia. It was because of an hour-long TV special on CBS Reports. This documentary, entitled Harvest of Shame, was a study on migratory farm workers in the country. Edward R. Murrow served as both host and reporter. The presentation was described by CBS in a press release as these are different views of the migrant workers who follow the sun and endless circle of poverty from Florida to New England, from California to the Pacific Northwest. Tonight on CBS Television Network, we'll bring you the vivid story of these underpaid, underfed, and undereducated Americans who harvest the crops. At the very moment when most of the land is filled with the spirit of Thanksgiving, because this was, November 25th, that would have been around Thanksgiving time, you will meet the millions of men and women and children whose lives and whose labor are America's harvest of shame. Today, this television special is still considered one of the most heralded TV documentaries of all time, which has prompted me, I need to go and watch it, I guess. It's like the number one documentary of all time, and I've actually never seen it. And it's interesting because it's dealing with something that, an issue that we're actually still dealing with today here in America all these many years later. So it'd be an interesting watch.
Absolutely.
Anything else, Jimbo? Or you just got general trivia from here on in?
Yeah, I'll save it for the end. I'll throw this out here. There was, on the evening of May 13, 1996, right before I graduated high school, actually, the Fresh Prince of Bel-Air did a television episode with William Shatner as the guest, where they actually referenced the performance of this on the Twilight Zone. So you might want to check that out if you can have it on DVD or Vudu or whatever, maybe YouTube. So, but other than that, I'll just throw my little story in at the end about this having some similarities to another Twilight Zone episode that we have covered.
Okay, so let me throw this in here. I have a portion of the script that I want to read. As we move along in the episode, Pat and Don come back, obviously, to the diner. The mechanic comes in after a short, brief time, back at the same table. Well, they come back and they try to get their original table because Don, again, is just so gripped by superstition. He has to ask the Mystic Seer more questions. So they come back, and then that's where we've already pointed out that they sit on opposite sides of the booth. Again, this wedge is becoming more and more visible. And as we crescendo to the episode, let me just give you I thought this is a great sort of soliloquy or monologue that Pat gives. Let let me back up in the script a little bit. She again is sort of pleading with him and asking him to listen to her. She says, "Oh, sweetheart, listen to me, please. If you love me, just listen to me." And then Don says, "No, you listen to me. This machine is predicting our future. Do you think I could just walk away from it?" And Don begins to cradle. It says cradle the mystic seer. Pat says, "I'm not talking about the machine anymore. I'm talking about you." And then she goes on to say, "Are you just going to sit there and let that thing run your life?" And she goes on, she says, "Isn't that exactly what you're letting it do?" Well, let me give Don's response. She says, "Are you going to just sit back and let that thing run your life?" And he says, "Run my life?" Don stares at the seer for a long moment, then rises and crosses to Pat. "Run my life?" he says. And she responds, "Isn't that exactly what you're letting it do? Don, it made you call the office before. It made you stay here instead of leave. It made you afraid to walk down the street. And now it's telling you where to go, where you're going to live. Why, it's as if every superstitious feeling you've ever had is wrapped up in this one machine. It doesn't matter whether it can foretell the future. What matters is whether you believe more in luck and in fortune than you do in yourself. You can decide your own life. You have a mind, and a wonderful mind. Don't destroy it trying to justify that cheap penny fortune machine to yourself." So that's kind of she goes on for, a good 30, 40 seconds with that line. And I thought that was really sort of the hinge of the whole episode. She's making a distinction really between, I think we'll talk about this in our wrap, in our questions and observations section, which I can sort of transition into that. Deciding your own life versus superstition. And I think, Jimbo, you had some thoughts on that as well. Do you want to go ahead and read what you had written down as far as your questions and observations for the episode?
Let me go ahead and read this similarity or differences between this episode, and if we go way back, I believe it's called The Fever. Okay. Basically, I'll just start at the beginning. This is from the book Rod Serling of the Twilight Zone, the 50th Anniversary Tribute by Douglas Broad and Carol Serling. If you're a Twilight Zone fan, this is another must-have. There's a lot of little tidbits and information in this one as well. So I'm just going to read this a couple paragraphs. It's a young, attractive couple pause on their journey in nick of time. The direction is reversed from The Fever. They drive through a small town, Ridgeview, Ohio, on their way to New York. Don and Pat Carter pause on their honeymoon when their convertible needs repairs. To kill time, they wander through a hamlet untouched by changes in post-war society. In an ancient diner, Carter grows fascinated with a tabletop fortune-telling machine. Insert a penny, and the devil-faced contraption spits out a card with an ambiguous destiny. At first amused, then concerned, finally devastated, Pat watches as her husband becomes an addict. Richard Matheson wrote the play, yet certain aspects appear to echo Serling's life. Shatner resembles Serling, short, darkly handsome, conventional, but with an edge. More notably is the resemblance between Patricia Breslin and photographs of Carol Kramer Serling from the late 1940s. The beautiful brunette with a probing intelligence and a firm moral, though not simplistically moralistic, stance suggests that this couple stands in for the Serlings, who did journey from Heartland, Ohio to Manhattan after Rod's early success. The machine predicts that Carter will receive a promotion. When Carter learns via another long-distance call that he did get that raise, he becomes convinced that the machine is all-knowing. Thanks to Pat's insistence, Don Carter manages to make the break. We'll drive out of this town and go where we want, anytime we please. Carter sums up the courage to counter his addiction thanks to a wife who is his equal, as compared to what an earlier generation might have considered a mere appendage. Man, that's a really tough line right there. This metaphor extends beyond the Serlings. Don and Pat Carter escape because they represent new Americans, young people redefining marriage as a true team. They serve as contrast for the old paradigm of marriage, which was the Gibbs and the Fever, the woman subservient to the man. Why does Don Carter deserve to be saved when Franklin Gibbs did not? Youth and attractiveness aside, Carter displays the warmth of a humanist. Before the problems begin, he and Pat hold hands, suggesting not only sensuousness, but a true affection for one another. He's also warm when speaking to others, including the diner's counterman, who was played by Guy Wilkerson. Gibbs, on the other hand, sealed his fate when, in response to Florence's request that he stop yelling because others were noticing at the casino, if you remember, he shouted, "To the devil with people. I'm not concerned with people, only this devil of a machine." Here we also encounter a final caper, if a realistic one. No sooner have Don and Pat Carter left that another notably older couple, Walter Reed and Dee Carroll, enter. He feeds the machine pennies. She weeps as the Satan-headed fortune teller regurgitates cards that in the man's mind imply that they are its slaves. The actors are dead ringers for Everett Sloane and Vivian Janis in The Fever. By implication, the older generation accepts its fate and so remains a prisoner of it, while the new breed of partners in life exert free will and escape. For them, then, there is hope for the future.
Yeah, it's an interesting take, compare and contrast with The Fever. I don't think the older couple are necessarily dead ringers, but it's an interesting point of view. But yeah, that's where we leave and wrap the episode. The older couple are gripped by fear and superstition, and they're just, loading the pennies in as fast as they can. And they're not going to make a move in their life without the mystic seer telling them what to do. And again, that brings us back around to, this question is, are you deciding your own life or superstition? Do you make your own luck, or are you subjected to an outside force called whatever?
Well, let's think,
control your
in
life.
Star Wars, it was known as, this is your destiny. Right. So what you see here is your destiny and your free will, predestination. You might even say in some instances. But if you could solve that issue, we would be getting paid a lot more than what we do right now, because it is.
Please write and tell us.
Tell as old as time. If you were able to dissect all that stuff and put it into different categories, whether it be religion in your life, the Bible, whatever. But you can see it in this movie. It's expressed, by the obsession. It's awful funny that we did the Howling Man, and you see his transformation into the horns and everything of what the world perceives as Satan looked like, and the little thing on top of this machine does kind of resemble Satan, as people would perceive him to look, which I think that. In the end, love conquers all. So I think the love that Pat and Don had conquered this obsession. But my question to you, Eric, is this. These are newlyweds on their honeymoon, right?
Mm-hmm.
My question to you is, did she, or even him, really know each other? She says that the line that you just read, and I was jotting it down as you were reading. Pat says, this is taking form of every superstition you ever had, every superstitious thought you ever had. So, to me, I'm wondering if they ever had counseling before marriage. Did she really know him, or was it just I'm in love? I don't really know him. You can be in love and not really know the person. So some things come up in their past, but to me. She should have known, and there's no way to tell this. She should have known, but if she said that line about his superstition thoughts, then he obviously had talked about it. She has to know, because he has a rabbit foot on his keychain. He has that lucky clover on his keychain. So you might say that he has an addictive personality, I guess. But to me, that's just something that I thought about. Does she really know him, or is she just in love with him?
Yeah, that's a fair point. I think it's a good snippet or some good advice about marriage. I mean, I think you're right. I think she obviously knew that was a piece of his personality, but loved him in spite of it. The problem is sometimes when you get into marriage, and I don't mean to go on, I'm no marriage counselor.
Welcome to marriage counseling, the Twilight Zone style.
Yeah, right. Sometimes there are pieces of your mate's personality that don't seem very influential or very big when you first meet, because you are blinded by, love. And as time goes on, kind of, it sort of is representative of the episode. Those things that start out very small and little maybe quirks in someone's personality, when you're with them day after day, year after year, it drives a wedge. It might be a point of contention, and that's, what marriage is all about, working through those differences. And, they sort of have that confrontational conversation, like, on the sidewalk there. And, when she tells him, and, he's going back and forth, and he tells, the comment that you referenced earlier. He feels like a child when she speaks. He feels like she's speaking down to him. But, that's just part of his personality. But again, comparing The Fever with this episode, it is an addictive person. It is an addictive part of his personality that he cannot let the superstitions go. Or just like gambling is addictive in The Fever. So, yeah, it definitely is interesting that you raised that point. Did she really know him? Did she really know him completely before they got married? And maybe not. The episode doesn't really delve too deeply into that. But I just had a question, and I think I know the answer. It's just sort of an open-ended question just for us to think. Did the mystic seer have actual powers to predict the future, or was it all brought about in Don's mind? Superstition and the obsessive behavior, and I think it's the latter.
And I think I bring it come back to the Magic 8 Ball. It's the exact same principle. Yeah. It's just you can find it at gag stores. You know what I mean? But this is the Twilight Zone, so you never know.
Yeah. So he had built this up in his mind, and it literally would have, if Pat wouldn't have stepped in, it probably would have ruined their life and marriage. I mean, it seems like he was just completely consumed by this, and he was just going to let it run wild. So that's why I like the episode. Moving on, if I had to rate the episode, again, I think it's definitely not as good as the last episode. Eye of the Beholder, not even... I wouldn't say it's not close to Eye of the Beholder, just by the reveal and the twists and everything. That's kind of untouchable, but I don't think it's a bad episode. I don't think it's in the bottom tier either. I think it's probably a notch above middle of the road. I'm probably going to give it a 7.5 or so as far as we're rating as we go along. This next episode coming up after this one is a complete dud in my mind, but I thought this had a good moral. It had a good storyline. It had it had a lot of, the concept was good, and the script I thought was really good. So yeah, I give it about a 7.5. And it's William Shatner. I mean, how can you not like William Shatner? The guy's just awesome. Jimbo?
Well, I will tell you this. Out of 3,589 votes on IMDb, this has a rating out of 10 stars, comes in at 8.3. I will tell you that.
Okay.
But I think they're wrong.
Me, tell me why.
I mean, when you think of Twilight Zones, you think of a big twist. Oh man, this stood out. Like last episode, they uncovered her face. She's beautiful. They're ugly. You think of Night at Willoughby, or Stop at Willoughby, where he's dead, but he's actually in Willoughby, and the coroner's Sons of Willoughby funeral home, whatever. You think of Monsters Do on Maple Street, how they're arguing, fighting. Come to find out, there's aliens. To me, this is just, hey, my car broke down. We go in here, we put a quarter in the machine, and we go out. There's nothing in this episode that draws me to it, that makes me like it. To me, this is, even though William Shatner and Patricia Breslin did great together, to me, it's not. I can't even put it in an upper echelon of season 2. Just from the ones I've watched so far. I'm a little behind Eric. Eric's like on season 4 or 5 already. But I'm just saying, to me, this, when I think of the Twilight Zone, this is one that does not ring Twilight Zone to me. So for that, I am going to give this a 4-star.
Oh, come on.
No, seriously. I mean, if you think about it, it's not very good. I don't know why you think it's a 7.5.
3,500 people can't be wrong.
30 out of the 4 billion people on the earth, 3,500 thinks it's an 8. Well, you know what? I'm going to go in there under different accounts and give it like a 2-star, so it drops that down to like a 6. Okay, yeah, but I mean, if at the end of this season and you look at this is probably going to end up probably around the middle of the pack or lower for me. But there's nothing about this episode that stands out that's going to make me give it one of our tragedies at the end of when we wrap up this. Absolutely not. There is nothing in this episode that is going to stand out that much.
So you give it
4. I'm giving it and that's being generous. A solid 4.
You give it that?
Are you giving me a boo? Let's hear it.
Solid explosion.
give me the boo, Eric. Go ahead.
A punch.
Oh no, Eric's got toys now, so I'm going to have to come up with something over here. But yeah, to me, it's just okay. I mean, to me, the next episode you said was a dud. I think it has more character development than this episode did. And it has the Twilight Zone twist. Even though you see the twist coming a mile away in the next episode, I just think it's a better story. So, but we'll find out next week when we do Lateness of the Hour. That's all I've got for this episode. You?
That's all I got from my end. You want to go ahead and wrap us up?
If you'd like to follow us on Facebook, the Tragedy Cinema podcast on Facebook, we have a lot of fun on there. ADZ's up there crying about he's only seen like 28 Christmas movies out of the 100 that's written down.
38.
Oh, sorry, 38.
38.
So there's that. If you want to send us an email at thetragedycinema@gmail.com, we'll read it. If you want to leave us a review, but we will read it on the air. But yeah, as we trudge along the Twilight Zone, it's hard to do when you start looking at the season as a whole and adjusting these episodes where they fall into place for you, because some stand out really well and actors stand out well, and there's some that just don't make the cut. And hate to say it, but this is one of them. So with that being said, I think this episode's coming to a close, and that's a wrap.
And cut.
Counterbalance in the little town of Ridgeview, Ohio. 2 people permanently enslaved by the tyranny of fear and superstition, facing the future with a kind of helpless dread. 2 others facing the future with confidence, having escaped one of the darker places of the Twilight Zone.